Okay, here I am again. I always have to get over my self-consciousness when I first start talking. And also on my own computer, my videos aren't loud enough. So I'm wondering if that's a problem. It's okay on my phone, but not on my laptop. So I don't understand that. Anyway, and I seem to be fairly soft-spoken. I didn't know that about myself. But anyway, I thought I would do a video on my top 5 favorite Victorian novels. And these are novels, they're my top 5 because they have, over the years, they've gotten better with each rereading. Some of these I read, as a 12-year-old or an early teen, and they just improve with age. I have certain authors that I have found didn't do that. So like the Brontes, I'm going to make another video. I have a love-hate relationship with the Brontes. They don't improve upon aging. I think I got more staid or something, and I just stopped really appreciating the whole passion, kind of supernatural, romantic thing they've got going on. Doesn't appeal to me. But anyway, that's another video, because I know a lot of people love the Brontes, and I admit they're brilliant writers. But the other author that a lot of people really like, and that I liked at one time when I was a teenager, I went through this craze. My sister Lisa and I just read so many Thomas Hardy books, and I really loved him. But I don't know, 12 years ago, 15 years ago or so, I tried to read him again, and he just did not appeal. He lost his appeal to me. He just seemed overwrought and kind of contrived and just pushing. I don't know. I didn't. He became almost unreadable. So I don't know. Maybe I should go back and try again. But I got too staid, I think, as I aged, and his type of romanticism ceased to appeal to me. So those two, I just sort of, I went through periods where I read a lot of them, and then they just sort of fell by the wayside. But these 5 didn't. I really, really love these 5 books. They're really my favorites. And I'm going to list them in the order of their publication. Now, the first one, I can't find a copy of Mary Barton. I can only find my North and South edition of Elizabeth Gaskell's novels. But Elizabeth Gaskell wrote Mary Barton. It was her first novel that she wrote. She did it because she was convalescing from, I think, childbirth, where the child died, or something happened where a child died, and she was really in mourning and grief-struck, and somehow she herself was physically recovering. And so while she was convalescing, I think her husband or a friend suggested she try writing a novel to occupy herself. And so she took it up, and she wrote Mary Barton while lying on her couch. It was her first novel, and it's a social novel about the workers in Manchester, England. And it's really interesting novel. It's like a slice of history. It's all on the workers' side. It's not like North and South. North and South was written as a response because people criticized Gaskell for only presenting the workers' point of view. So North and South was the next one she wrote, where she tried to show the workers, like with the Higgins, and then also a sympathetic character, Mr. Thornton. So, and Margaret was sort of the bridge. So that's North and South. But in Mary Barton, it's about this poor young girl named Mary Barton, and she gets into this predicament partly through circumstances, and partly because of her own bad judgment. And she has to work to figure it out. She has to be really resourceful and figure out how to save the day. So it starts very slowly. It builds the background of the families and the poverty that they live in, the nature of their friendship. And then it leads up into the time when Mary Barton is now a young lady, and she's faced with certain temptations, and she does something that things just work out where it becomes the end of the novel is like a nail biter. So it really speeds up. At first it's slow, but then it really speeds up and gets really, really riveting. It's a great novel. I really love it. I've read it at least 3 times, and I'm sad I can't find a copy. At one point I had 3, and now I can't find any. But Mary Barton is definitely one of my favorite Victorian novels. I just love the historical and social aspect of it. The character development is excellent. The plot is great. It's a really good novel. All right, the next novel that's one of my top 5 favorites is Dickens, Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. And am I showing that right? Yeah. And this is a book I've read maybe, I don't know how many times. I read this maybe when I was 12, and I just loved it. I loved all the characters. In fact, I was trying to remember the name of Emily's, who was Emily's uncle's name who took care of her? Anyway, I just love all the characters, the Macabres, and Uriah Heep, and Peggotty, and just so many wonderful, wonderful characters. It's a great novel. It's a nice, thick novel. I always like thick novels for the winter time. In fact, the last time I read this, I read it out loud to my family. My oldest daughter was off at college, but we still had 4 at home, so they were ranging in ages from maybe 9 to 17. And I read this out loud. Even my husband listened in. And it was an especially dark, gloomy winter, and it was such a cozy thing to read out loud. A really, really good story. It's sort of the quintessential Dickens. I do love A Tale of Two Cities, so that's a close second, but I really do think David Copperfield was my first love of Dickens, and I really cherish it. So that is my second favorite Victorian novel. The third one, which was published in 1855, and I can't find a copy of it, so I'm just holding up Barchester Towers instead, but it's The Warden, the first book in the Chronicles of Barset series. And it's just a wonderful book. It's the first Trollope I ever read. My mother recommended it to me. She was a great lover of Trollope. She had almost all his books. I just have this memory of my mother sitting in her bed, and over her bed they had this huge bookcase, and it was just full of Trollope books, like she slept beneath Trollope. But anyway, the Warden is the first book I ever read, and it's just a wonderful story about a good man who gets caught up, in the situation that, and how he responds to it. And it's very funny, and it's very touching. And Septimus Harding is the Warden, and he's just a wonderful character. So The Warden would be my third favorite Victorian novel. The fourth one, which came out in 1861, is Silas Marner by George Eliot, who is really Marianne Evans. This book, I remember reading this book as a teenager. I think it was assigned to me in high school, but I can't quite remember. But I just remember being really intimidated that I wasn't going to get the language, because I had a really bad experience in high school where I had a terrible English teacher, Mrs. Vadnais. I still remember her. And she would just throw the stuff at you without any background. I was so eager to read Shakespeare and all these famous writers, and she just didn't give you any help. And so it was very intimidating, and I kind of got convinced that I was stupid and I couldn't really read this classic literature. And so when I went to read Silas Marner, whether it was assigned or not, I don't remember. I remember just there felt like this wall, that the language was so literary, with these long, intricate sentence structures and a lot of vocabulary that was unfamiliar to me. And I remember reading it and thinking, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get this, it's too hard. And then somehow that wall dissolved and I got absorbed into the story. And so I've always had an affection for Silas Marner, because it sort of was my breakthrough moment where I gained confidence that yes, I could be an intelligent reader. It's a wonderful story about a miser named Silas Marner who was rejected by, I guess they were Puritans, a Puritan community, and he gets ostracized unjustly, and it breaks his heart, and he becomes a miser instead. He decides money's the only thing that matters, and he hoards his gold. But one day his gold is stolen, and in its place, sort of in his feverish mind, he thinks it's a replacement. He finds very soon thereafter, after the robbery, he finds this little girl with golden curls. Her name's Eppie, and he raises her as his daughter. And Eppie is now old enough, and she's sort of has developed a friendship with a local lad that's sort of deepening into a romance. And so she's on the cusp of kind of leaving him. And it's all about the mystery behind where she came from and what happened to that gold. And it's a short story. I mean, it's a novella, so it's not long to read. And George Eliot writes so precisely and so beautifully. It's so deeply nuanced and just really good at creating a description and creating an atmosphere. So Silas Marner is definitely a story that you can reread, and it never loses its charm. And then the last Victorian novel was published in 1881, the last novel of my favorites, and that is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This one I actually knew the story before I ever read it because I watched that Walt Disney movie back in the 60s. It was so good. The guy who played Long John Silver just acts up a storm. He's great. So I already knew the storyline before I started reading it. And I've read this out loud to my children. I remember one time we went to the beach for the weekend, and we were homeschoolers. We were studying pirates, and this was our read aloud at the beach. It was great. And I just love the story. It's, the whole atmosphere of the Admiral Benbow Inn, and that whole scene where he's hiding in the apple barrel, and the ending, the gripping ending. Just, I really, really just love this novel. And even as an adult, when you're reading it to kids, it's just wonderful. It's a wonderful experience. So those are my 5 top favorite Victorian novels: Mary Barton, David Copperfield, The Warden, Silas Marner, and Treasure Island. That's after many years of reading many Victorian novels, and I enjoy many of them. But those, when I think about it, these are my top 5. Anyway, goodbye.